Okay, welcome to the video. My name is Drew. I'm an exercise physiologist and acupuncturist, and we're going to be taking you through breathing mechanics. And in this video, we're looking particularly at the interaction of the abdominal wall and the pelvic floor and how they work together, how they co-contract to engage your abdominal wall and your pelvic floor, and just how they kind of sync together. And we put this in the context of breathing. So when you're inhaling, when you're exhaling, you'll see that the way we kind of help retrain pelvic floor, way we help retrain abdominal wall is very close connected, and this is very, very strongly connected to your breathing mechanics. So here we have the abdominal wall itself. We have the obliques through here. So this would be like the lower layer, and underneath that would be the transverse abdominis, and underneath here we have the pelvic floor bowl as well. So when we looking at this kind of mechanics, what we are looking at there particularly is when we breathe in and out, how these muscles work together. So let's just play this along a little bit. So these arrows are really good because you can see all the different lines of contraction. So for example, when you exhale from underneath, the pelvic floor is going to contract and it's going to have a lifting feel to it. When you exhale, when you engage the obliques and the abdominal wall, there's going to be a in and up feel. When you contract the rectus abdominis, depending if you do upper fibers or lower fibers, if you just do the upper fibers only, it's going to pull the rib cage down. So you're going to often cue as down rib. If you focus on the lower fibers, you're going to pull your pubic bone or pull your zipper up. And when you combine the two together, you're going to basically ribs down, zipper up, and you're going to come into a sit-up type of position or spinal flexion. So that can be done in neutral, where the spine is relatively stable and doesn't move, or you can do it in flexion, where you create a pelvic tilt, and the lower back flattens out into flexion, and then you essentially creating a sit-up type of move. When you do all that together, you have a really strong 360-degree bracing technique. So you've got from underneath, pelvic floor, you've got the abdominal wall front to back, and then you've also got the diaphragm, and that when that all contracts together, it stabilizes the spine. So it creates a really strong, stiff, supported spine. And from that, that's when you will execute either a punching technique or a lifting technique or an explosive technique where you really want strong, stiff spine supported, so forces can generate through the kinetic chain and be delivered to the extremities or wherever you want to direct the energy or the force to. So when we're training people, whether it's for rehabilitation, for breathing mechanics, or for sporting function, this stuff becomes super important. Okay, let's have a bit more of a play. We're using the app called Muscles in Motion, which if you want to get this copy yourself, absolutely do. It's a great learning tool for learning musculoskeletal anatomy. So we can see here, weakness of abdominal wall is characterized by slackness. So when you've got a weak abdominal wall or it's like overly stretched, you're going to get a slight protruding belly. So if you've done a lot of stretching or overworking your abdominals in the front, so lots of cobra type stretching, you potentially can create a little bit of slackness here. And as you see, you'll get a little bit of a belly. Now, a little bit of a belly is actually quite normal. So when you're fully relaxed, you'll get a belly. And when you inhale, you'll get a little bit of this kind of protrusion of the abdominal contents because diaphragm sitting here is doming downwards, and it's literally just pushing your internal organs down and out. They don't really have anywhere to go, so the belly has to protrude you out. So on your inhalation phase, we want the belly to come out a little bit, which is really normal. That's exactly what we want to see. Okay, but on the exhalation phase, the belly should then naturally draw in. So a little bit of protrusion is fine, but if you're getting this big kind of pot belly kind of situation going on here, big rounding, this is often just the abdominal wall has been overly stretched and is weak. So you can get like lots of men and women, but you see it more in men, where they have these big rounded bellies, these big pot bellies. But there's when you actually poke into the belly, there's not a lot of adipose tissue there. There's not a lot of belly fat. So in that case, it's just literally the connective tissue, the fascia, the muscles have just been overstretched. And with the muscles, the abdominal muscles themselves are very weak, and they're not supporting or resisting the weight of the internal organs being pushed out. And the problem with that is it's going to put a lot of pressure into your lumbar spine. It's going to put your ribcage in a very poor function to actually breathe, to draw air into your lungs. And it's going to create issues in your hip joint, so potentially like femoral impingement, um, SIJ joints, and basically it's going to predispose you to have a lot of lower back problems, a lot of lower back issues, which is what we don't want to see. So this is a really good example here. So that's weakness of abdominal wall where it sags out. Okay. So you can have quite a strong abdominal wall. Like for example, myself, like I have a pretty strong core, but when I'm fully relaxed, I can get a nice rounded belly. And that's because I do a lot of breathing work where I'm really working on getting big diaphragmatic breathing, and so I'm getting extension or distension of the abdomen. But it's more in eccentric control versus passive and relaxed. So you can get uh, this kind of belly shape, but have quite a functional core as well. Okay. So what we get there is this kind of increased lumbar lordosis. So as this belly is protruding forward and this weakness is here, this is more weakness more than anything. Essentially what happens to create stability in the lower back is that you go into lordosis, so you get an arch in your lower back. Okay. And that's going to close down these lumbar vertebrae, and it's going to predispose you to maybe getting some kind of lower back issues. So you're creating this anterior pelvic tilt. And it kind of feeds into itself a lot. So the weaker the abdominal wall gets, the more anterior tilted you get, the weaker the abdominal wall gets, and it kind of like is a self-perpetuating kind of loop. You can even see things like the piriformis is getting stretched. So as you get more anterior tilted, piriformis gets on stretch, so it lengthens under tension, doesn't get a chance to really relax, and so the piriformis can get really tight. And for some people, that may even create sciatica, where the piriformis is impinging onto the sciatic nerve, which is either sitting underneath it or going through it, which can be quite yuck. And then we have the pelvic floor here. So you can picture this is the bladder, this is your intestines. So when you inhale, all these organs are being pushed down inferiorly, so they're getting pressed downwards. Okay? And it's the pelvic floor which is essentially holding them there. Okay? And so when you inhale, the pelvic floor should open and dome down a little bit. So there's an opening sensation or a creating space sensation. Okay. And what's really happening is that those pelvic floor muscles are contracting eccentrically. So they're contracting, so the controlled movement, lengthening under tension to stabilize and support and hold all those internal organs which are being pushed down inferiorly. So you can see that angle there as it's pushing down. These muscles are going to catch those organs. Cool. So here, that's inhale. And then as you exhale, they kind of contract, they tighten up. Take that back a little bit. So here, inhale, and then as you exhale, that's exhale there. So that's the contracting muscle. So when the muscles contract, there's a squeezing sensation to it. So when I'm helping people retrain their pelvic floor, it's usually a post back injury, because back injury, you get that anterior tilting as a guarding mechanism. The pelvic floor gets inhibited, so it gets weak, and so then you get all that kind of pelvic floor issues. I mean, pelvic floor is often related to women because of pregnancy and things like the changes in the pelvis, but it absolutely affects men as well. We essentially have very similar anatomy down there in terms of same type of muscle groups, etc. I mean, the sexual organs are different, of course, but in terms of the muscle slings and things like that, very similar. So the principle is very similar in how we approach it. So what you want to be able to do is when you inhale, you want to be able to feel the pelvic floor muscles kind of relaxing and opening and contracting in this kind of lengthening feel. And then when you exhale, there's a contracting, squeezing feel where you're kind of pulling the attachment points towards each other through here. So you can see there's this muscle that goes this way, and there's muscles that go this way. So they have like a cross-link kind of action to them. All right. And so that gives it lots of support. So the whole unit as a whole contracts together. Now you can do some very specialized physiotherapy where they can help you isolate different sections of that. It's a very specialized technique. And you need to be in the room with someone who really knows what they're doing to doing that. In my experience, however, once we retrain breathing mechanics and link and stick them together, you'll find that often these muscles, with a little bit of concentration, a little bit of practice, they come back online. The only time, in my experience, it doesn't work when there's like neurological impingement. So we're getting some kind of inhibition because the nerve has been interfered with or compressed or impinged. Okay, and so that requires a different approach. That requires hands-on specialist approach. So let's continue. So here, so now we've got, this is the transverse abdominis, so that's the big belt abdominal muscle wraps around. So when you exhale, the muscle contracts in that 360-degree component, and as a squeezing feel, so the muscles are tensing. So when you exhale, you should feel the muscles tense and slightly draw in. It's not so much just sucking them in, it's just they're kind of sliding across each other, so they're getting stronger. So it's the same thing as if you do a bicep curl and you create the muscle there, you get that tension there. Same thing's happening here in the muscles. It's skeletal muscle, which means for prefrontal cortex, you can consciously say contract. So with practice, you can create the mind to the muscle connection and turn that muscle on. Pretty cool. So inhale, exhale. And this is a good angle here. There, perfect. So on the exhale, the abdominals contract, they contract in, and the abdominal floor contracts and goes up. So you get the abs on the front contracting, a slight drawing in, squeezing sensation, pelvic floor, slight squeezing, drawing up sensation. But just on that, often pelvic floor training is cued to suck up. I don't like that cue. What you want is just to create this feeling of contraction and not drawing up, sucking up into your belly, basically. So just put a bit of squeeze in there, and that's all you need. Nice and slow. So breathe in, breathe out, breathe in, breathe out. Back here again. So these muscles are contracting together. Okay. A decrease occurs in the tonic activity of pelvic floor muscles. So when your abs on the front are weak, basically the pelvic floor is weak, and vice versa, because they're interrelated together. They're basically a team that works together. So if one goes weak, the other one tends to go weak with it. Play out a little bit longer.
Stabilizing the vertebrae column.
For stabilization. Oh, come back. But injury in the timing for stabilization of the vertebral column. So what this is basically saying is the timing of the sinking goes out of whack. So you can turn on your abs, but the pelvic floor is not contracting, or the pelvic floor is contracting and the abdominal wall is not contracting together. Then you're not getting the correct sinking and the stabilization, and then you can kind of get weird compensatory kind of patterns that emerge as well.
Injury in their timing for stabilizing the vertebrae column.
Get into a bit of trouble mechanically.
In spite of the mentioned reciprocation, motor control of each of the muscle groups separately is important functionality.
Okay, so let's pause there, go back. The co-contracting of the abdominal wall and the pelvic floor. So This is exhalation there. So you're drawing in. So the abdominals draw in and the pelvic floor contracts, and there's that lifting sensation you can see. Then as you breathe in, belly goes out. Belly goes out, pelvic floor relaxes and opens. Exhale, draw in, pelvic floor draws, contracts as well. So they link together. So when you're breathing, okay, the pelvic floor and the abdominal wall will be linking and syncing together. And at the same time, the diaphragm, which is sitting basically along this line of the rib cage, on the inhalation, the diaphragm's pushing down. So when you breathe in, the pelvic floor muscles here relax and open, and that accommodates the internal organs being pushed inferiorly down in that downward line. So diaphragm and then pelvic floor, they move together. Diaphragm, pelvic floor, and abdominal wall move together as well. So then what we need to do when we're in movement is work out what type of movement we're doing. So if we're doing like something which is static, so imagine you're doing a bench press and you're lying down and you're going to press, you're going to set your rib cage, you're going to engage your brace. Okay, inhale, but keep the brace engaged so the spine stays nice and stiff. And then exhale, you're going to really engage the abdominal brace stronger. Okay, and that stabilizes the spinal column and the thorax so that when the pec is pushing in the press, you've got a strong base to push out of. Whereas if you don't brace, then your body's going to move and you're going to lose stability, so you're going to get an energy leak. So through the kinetic chain, so the force is not going to go smoothly into the pec and into the anterior deltoid and the tricep where the big driving muscles are. You're going to get a slight shift and you're going to lose energy. It's kind of like, think of walking in sand. Like when you walk in sand, the feet kind of sink in there, so the reaction forces are dissipated, and so you don't have as a stronger kind of heel off, if you will. Similar kind of principle here. So when you're doing things like lifting weights, you often do a posture set. You align yourself, you inhale, then you exhale, engage your brace, your abdominal brace, slight pelvic floor brace, maybe at 10%, maybe 15%. So it's not maximal, it's just enough to maintain alignment and posture. Then you set yourself, big breath in, and then you generally on the exertion phase or the pushing phase, depending on the movement you are doing, then you exhale as you execute your movement, because as you exhale, the abdominals are going to contract. That's going to create that strong stability, and you're going to drive out through that. So the technique or the skill in learning exercise is using your inhale and your exhale to help drive movement mechanics. So in that way, when you're training, you are always using your core. So I remember one of my old mentors he was a bodybuilder, Marcus. He's a great dude. He would never do any ab work because he would say that when he's in the weight room, he's just constantly using his core all the time. And from this kind of perspective, that's true. That's true. Then in terms of movement, so movement's more complicated. So imagine you're going to be doing some kind of like throwing movement. So whenever there's turning or twisting or rotation, okay, then the different aspects of the core start to turn off. So you get left, right, on, off type thing. So if you want to turn to the left, for example, then these left obliques are going to kind of be really strongly engaged to pull this rib cage down, which is going to create a rotational torque this way. So your exhalation is going to be focused on that left rib getting depressed to create the twist, the rotation. Now in those kind of movements, though, they happen so fast, you don't really have a chance to really kind of concentrate on squeezing your abs. So if you're doing a tennis serve or if you're throwing a ball. So in that way, what you need to kind of train the spinal mechanics first and then introduce the technique and just focus on your inhale and your exhale, and then the mechanics will align correctly. So the only time that doesn't work is if you had injury in the past or you've developed poor posture or motor patterns, which then we need to retrain so that the body can move correctly in its mechanical function. So once you get the breathing synced in with the movement, then everything kind of works together and the kinetic chain is all syncing up, and then you get this beautiful expression of movement, which is kind of what we're for. So that's a little bit of a video on the connection of abdominal walls with the pelvic floor. So when you're breathing in and when you're breathing out. So on the inhale, you're going to have a slight belly out. Pelvic floor is going to dome down. Okay, diaphragm's going to dome down. Okay, so that gives you a feeling of growing tall and expanding. Okay. On the exhale, it's all reverse. Pelvic floor is going to contract and come up a little bit. Abdominal wall is going to contract in, and then the diaphragm is going to dome back up, and you're going to have a strong abdominal contraction to create stability. And then you're going to move between the two. In another video, we'll look at the spinal mechanics of when you breathe in and when you breathe out. But essentially on the inhale, it's creating spinal extension, so growing tall or going into a back bend, spinal extension. And then on the exhale, it's reverse. You're going to go into spinal flexion or softening or rounding the spine, depending on the type of move you're doing. So when you combine the abdominal function with the spinal alignment and then the pelvic tilting, you get all those three things working together really, really well. Then breathing mechanics becomes really natural, and then you can apply that to basically anything. So thanks for watching. If you have any comments, please let me know.